When it comes to Christian holidays, Easter celebrates one of the most important events of our faith. Easter Sunday completes the story. It connects the narrative of a Savior who was born to die and then to be raised back to life. Our faith is built on the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So today is big. For many families, there are some traditions around Easter. Even though Easter was about Jesus, when I was a kid, Easter Sunday primarily meant one thing: candy, and lots of it. But baskets of candy weren't the only tradition in my family. We'd attend our church's sunrise Easter service to commemorate Jesus' empty tomb being discovered early in the morning. Next, we'd come home where my brother and I would hunt for hidden plastic eggs. After that, we'd have a big lunch to celebrate the day. And finally, we'd all generally pass out. We'd accomplished a lot by noon. But here's what's interesting about Easter traditions. Easter Sunday is fun and celebratory and full of candy and honey-baked ham and potato salad. But what about the next day? The Monday after Easter? Life just goes back to normal. We might snack on jelly beans and Cadbury eggs for the next few weeks, but what about the emotions surrounding Easter morning? The celebration, the sense of newness and life and beginnings. I'd say that all starts to wear off Sunday afternoon. Then it's back to business as usual. It's back to, what are we having for dinner? Who's going to unload the dishwasher? Has the laundry been folded? If we gave up anything for Lent, Easter is exciting because we get what we gave up back. And all the chocolate, all the Netflix, all the good things we denied ourselves. Yes, we're still excited and glad that Jesus is alive, but the truth is, life just seems to go on. There are lists to check off, errands to run, lunches to pack, shows to watch, and jobs to do. It's not that we're no longer excited that Jesus came back from the dead. It's just that once life starts up again and things go back to normal, what exactly are we supposed to do with that information? In this series, we've been talking about change and how we respond to it, whether that change is good or bad. And this week, as we wrap up this series, we're examining one of our most universal responses to change. When can things go back to normal? It's why after a breakup, we say things like, I just want things to go back to how they were before. Or after a big move, we say, I just want to get past the settling in part and have it feel like home. Or in the midst of a job change, we say, I just want to find a rhythm and feel like I know what I'm doing. That desire is even reflected in how we move on after the Easter meal dishes have been cleaned. It's not intentional. It's not like we stop caring about Easter or what Jesus did for us. But still, Easter Sunday is a change in our usual. And when we encounter change, we're usually looking to the moment we get back to our normal. Because all of us want that feeling of getting back to normal again, of feeling comfortable again. But if the story of Easter shows us anything, it's that because of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, things truly will never be the same. But how can we live in that reality every day? Well, let's look at the first Easter Sunday. Leading up to that day, Jesus' followers had watched their leader and teacher be arrested, beaten, and tortured. They watched him carry a cross up a hill outside of Jerusalem, get nailed to that cross, and then die. It's hard to know what those days following Jesus' death would have been like for his followers. At a minimum, the disciples were in shock. They had lost their friend and their teacher, but they also feared for their own lives. The authorities and religious leaders knew they'd been followers of Jesus. Maybe they couldn't even mourn Jesus' death because any sign that they'd been with him or supported him could be used against them. So with all the shock, emotion, and the fear of the last few days still fresh in their minds, the disciples hid away in the upper room of a home. Chances are they were asking the questions everyone asks after a life-altering change. Where do we go from here? What does the new normal look like? Let's pick up the story with that in mind. Early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. She said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For until then they still hadn't understood the scriptures that said, Jesus must rise from the dead. Then they went home. Mary was standing outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she stooped and looked in. She saw two white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angels asked her. "Because they have taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." She turned to leave and saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him and I will go and get him." "Mary," Jesus said. She turned to him and cried out, "Rabboni," which is Hebrew for teacher. "Don't cling to me," Jesus said, "for I haven't yet ascended to the Father. But go and find my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene found the disciples and told them, "I have seen the Lord." Then she gave them his message. What's interesting about this story is that even though Mary had spent the past few years traveling with and listening to Jesus, in this moment, she didn't recognize him. It could have been because she was crying so much that she couldn't see through her tears, or maybe she didn't recognize him because he didn't look like the Jesus she remembered. Maybe with the scars on his hands and the wounds just barely beginning to heal, he didn't resemble the person she had grown to love. Or maybe it was just this. Mary didn't recognize the Jesus standing before her because it wasn't the same Jesus. Because the resurrection transformed him. It changed him. If she was looking for the Jesus who taught some controversial things, performed crowd-pleasing miracles, and attracted the most unlikely of followers, she wasn't going to find him here. She was standing before a Jesus who had been a teacher, but who had also been beaten to death. She was looking at a Jesus who had performed some impressive miracles, but who also had been dead for 3 days only to get up and walk away from his tomb. This wasn't the same Jesus as before. This was a Jesus marked by death and then resurrection. But once Jesus said Mary's name, she immediately saw who he was. And then she ran to tell the disciples that their Savior is indeed risen. The thing is, that first Easter Sunday was never meant to be an event we celebrate once a year with chocolate bunnies and jelly beans and nice clothes. No, it was meant to mark a turning point. A moment that marked a change, not a blip on the timeline of history where life would immediately go back to business as usual. There was the world before Easter and the world after, because with this moment, things would absolutely never be the same. When we celebrate Easter, we celebrate life and death and resurrection, not life and death and life back to how it was before, but resurrection. Easter is all about acknowledging the miracle that took place and then embracing a change that brought new life. Easter is an invitation to a new way of life. Easter is a reminder that going back to the way things were is not the goal of the Christian life. As people who follow Christ, we aren't interested in the way things were. We're interested in the way things could be. We aren't interested in looking back. We're interested in pushing through the old and the painful and the challenging and finding the new on the other side of suffering. It's why the Jesus we celebrate today has the scars of crucifixion. He bears the marks of the moments that hurt him and crushed him and killed him. He could only be a resurrected Jesus if he was first a crucified one. The hardest parts of our stories are the parts when we had to change or pivot, and we didn't want to. When we were forced to endure a sort of death to the way of life we knew and had to find a new normal. Like Mary, there's something in all of us that hopes that on the other side we'll see the life we recognized before. Except that's not what happens. It's not what should happen. When we've experienced a sort of crucifixion, a sort of death, then resurrection will be what we find on the other side. Not life as we knew it, but life as it now is, after the fact. Life as it should be. So what does this mean for us? It means when life changes, when life gives us a pivot, the goal isn't to go back to normal, to how things were before. Instead, the goal is to live our lives in light of this change. We don't look back, but we go forward. We don't try to go back to life as it was before, the diagnosis, the breakup, the job loss, the move, or the argument. No, Easter Sunday was never meant to be a day that just marked an event. It was meant to be a day that signaled a new pattern in our lives, of life and death and resurrection, of old things becoming new, of life on the other side of something being broken, different than it had been before. When life deals us a hard blow, when change rocks our world, when a pivot makes everything around us feel unsteady, it isn't easy. But Easter tells us there's life after it. There is life after the challenging. There is a life on the other side. Throughout the series, we've seen that change isn't the end of the story. Instead, it's an invitation to look inside and see what needs to change. It's an invitation to accept change and all it offers, even when the results of that change are challenging for us. But ultimately, change is always necessary toward experiencing something new, something better, and something richer on the other side. Change may never be easy, and I get it, but it doesn't have to be feared. And it can be the best thing God can give us to invite us into a new kind of experience with Him. And maybe that's what this Easter Sunday can be for you this year. A day to mark a new way of life for you from here on out. A new life where things will never be the same for good.